everybody. Welcome back to Trekology. It's our second episode, and today we're comparing two episodes of Next Generation, one of the original series, The Naked Time and The Naked Now. And so, Tom, what are you doing there?
Well, because you said we were going to talk about nakedness this episode, I thought that's what I was supposed to do.
Well, maybe later. Did you get infected with a random uh, space disease that's making you wig out all the time?
Well, there was a couple times where I had something the doctor couldn't quite identify, so perhaps. And I definitely have been known to lose my judgment at certain points. I think you've been present for a few of them.
You don't even need a drug to lose your judgment at certain points, man.
Exactly. It's just kind of the natural way my brain functions. And don't worry, parents at home, I won't be subjecting anybody to where few have gone before. This is not
Uh,
But you can trust me. I got it in the
Trust.
spirit of the episode. Yeah.
Well, Tom, how about you tell us about the episodes that we are talking about today? What's going on in the Naked Now and the Naked Time?
So we're talking about one of the most classic episodes of the original series, which is The Naked Time. And basically the plot for the two episodes are practically the same. The second number two episode to ever air, The Next Generation, was basically not exactly a remake, but kind of an homage to the original Next Generation episode. And what happens is, in the original episode, is the Enterprise is going to observe a planet whose sun has already died and is about to collapse on itself, I guess because of funny gravitational things or something. And they get there and they find that the scientists at the observation post that they're supposed to pick up are all dead and frozen. And they even find one person who, or they don't actually show it, but the guy in the away team, Spock, says that he found somebody in the shower, but with their clothes on. He did shower with their clothes on, but somebody had turned off all the environmental controls, and so everybody there had been frozen, but it looked like somebody had been strangled, somebody had a phaser. And so it was kind of a mysterious situation. And meanwhile, while they're looking at stuff, one of the guys takes off his glove, rubs his nose, and then they beam up to the Enterprise. The decontamination procedures are all to no avail. And from there on, basically, this strange condition starts spreading throughout the Enterprise, where people basically act like they're really drunk, but even worse, like their sense of judgment is totally incapacitated. Sulu takes his shirt off and goes around chasing people with a fencing foil, and one of the not a red shirt, but one of the one-off characters who is Irish, so of course he's gonna get drunk. Goes off takes over the engineering and starts subjecting everybody to his terrible Irish drinking songs for most of the episode. And other things happen. Spock has a very emotional moment. Kirk goes on kind of a sexist tirade about the Enterprise, and so on and so forth. And then finally, McCoy figures it out, of course, at the last minute, and then they have to do some kind of weird techno battle thing that not only saves them from crashing into the collapsing planet, but sends them back in time.
And so,
but only for
like,
a few
in a
days.
way, I realized when I was watching this, I realized this is almost like a prequel to the fourth movie, because it gives them the technology to go back in time to save us from the stupid whale probe.
Yeah, except for it's not the same way, because I was thinking, well, there's a couple episodes where they go back in time to Earth in the 60s, and there was a series, so I thought, oh, that's cool, like they had a continuation from that. So I went to go watch the beginning of those episodes to see if they actually made the reference, but they don't. The first one where they go back in time, and then there's like a U.S. Air Force jet pilot who thinks it's a UFO, and something happens, and they have to beam him on, and they have to the ship, and they have to do all these things to make sure they don't mess with the timeline. He said that they went back in time from the light speed breakaway factor.
Yeah.
Which wasn't really the same thing that happened in the end of The Naked Time.
And that
And then
episode
the
is
other one
so
was,
ridiculous too, because
yeah.
they're just like, we're just going back in time to go back in time. We're gonna hang out in 1960. Why, Captain Kirk?
For historical reasons.
Because we want to.
Because 1968 was such an interesting year. But and then the other one was what's it called? Operation Earth or Mission. And you know the one that was the backdoor pilot for the series that never happened. Where you have Gary Seven and Isis the cat and everything. And I thought, oh, well, maybe they used that in that episode. But no, it was, they somehow got thrown back from a black star, or whatever that was. But I did read, we're going to talk more about behind the scene things later, but I did read that the original concept for this episode was it was supposed to be a two-parter. And the idea is that they go through this whole shenanigans with everybody getting super drunk. And then when it sends them back in time, it sends them way back in time. And the next episode was supposed to be the one with the Air Force pilot, which they ended up retooling and doing in another season. But it was originally supposed to be those two back to back.
That would have made more sense. Instead of him just being like, let's go back in time just to hang out. That'll be fun.
Yeah. Then next generation, do you want me to explain the Next Generation episode?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Or, I mean, you can too if you want.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So in the Next Generation episode, it's basically the same. The Enterprise is supposed to check up on this lost spaceship, and they find it around some star doing some crazy gravitational thing is happening. And they find the spaceship, everybody's dead, there are people freezing in their showers, and again, people don't follow proper COVID procedure, and they touch the dead bodies with their fingers.
Wear your mask.
Yeah, everybody, wear masks. Don't be touching other people's faces. Come on, pay attention here. And so they bring the disease back to the Enterprise. It spreads around. Everybody gets drunk. And, of course, because it's Wesley Crusher, when he gets drunk, he thinks he should be running the ship. And so he uses his super special... It's kind of like the talk boy from, you remember Home Alone?
Yeah.
Yeah. He uses his talk boy to fool everybody into thinking that Picard has told him that he should be the captain. And he takes command of the Enterprise using his talk boy. And shuts down the ship, and the star's about to explode. But luckily, Crusher saves everybody, and everybody is happy again at the very end.
You forgot about the sexy time.
Yeah, we'll get there for sure. Hey, you're drunk. Sexy time, right? Yeah.
Well, my wife Erica made an interesting observation about it. She said, "Wow, the Next Generation episode's a lot more horny than the original ones."
Yeah, I was gonna say that. I was gonna say, like, in the Next Generation episode, apparently in the 80s, everybody thought, when you get drunk, you have a lot of sex. Yeah. It's like obvious. And in the TOS episode, they were like, when you get drunk, you sing Irish folk songs.
And you have heart-to-heart talks about your deep down emotions.
Yeah. Deep, repressed emotions. Yeah. So, like, let's start with the TOS episode. What is, like, one of your favorite parts? Most memorable parts of it?
Wait, the Sulu part is always classic. And I like also the part where he gets on the bridge and he's like, this Uhura, like, I'll save you for later. And she's like, neither. She, like, pushes away from him and she's like, I don't need your saving. I'm not a fair lady.
Yeah.
And then, the scene with Spock was interesting. I think it might have been a little bit overdone, but it just goes to show, and I think that was kind of an important part of his character, because I think for a lot of people who aren't really into Trek, they kind of misunderstand Spock's character. I think that he really is cold and emotionless, but he's actually one of the most feeling characters in the series. And the thing about Leonard Nimoy that I think is so impressive is usually he's so subtle about showing it, usually. And in this, they try to kind of make him have a breakdown and cry over it, which is just not really his forte. I think the subtlety is so much. But I thought it was an interesting reveal for Spock, and kind of the whole thing about Nurse Chapel having a thing for him. Um, but it was some interesting things for the character developments for that way, and I think that kind of the idea was, and I mean, Spock even explains this to the audience, but it kind of revealed some of the hidden personality traits of some of the characters. And then Kirk kind of goes about his whole torture thing about how part of him wants to have a normal life, but he's too married to his career and everything like that, and stuff like that, which is interesting.
Yeah. I think the Spock thing is really great, and it works really well here. They kind of try to do a little bit of that in the Next Generation episode, but it works in the TOS episode because it's not the second episode of the series.
Yeah.
And so we actually know these characters, right? We know that Spock is the emotionless one. We know that Kirk is the he loves the ship. He really cares about his ship, and yeah, we know some things about these characters. So revealing their deeper selves is an interesting flip, especially the Spock bit.
Yeah. Well, and what you said about the Next Generation episode, it hadn't really occurred to me when I was watching it, but yeah, something I had read about a lot of the criticisms with it was like the second episode is not the one where you show people acting out of character. For going back and watching it as someone who grew up with the series, like you understand, like, oh, these people are acting out of character, or they're kind of revealing their hidden feelings and stuff like that. And I guess what the concept was that Roddenberry's idea was that he wanted to reveal the inner motivations for the characters, but it was just as a kind of a way to introduce them. But it just didn't really work in the second episode before we even really got to know them. And what had happened is that he started writing the script and then he didn't finish it, and he handed it over to Dorothy Fontana, which was one of the main writers for the original series, except for she wrote it under a pen name. And then they gave credit to the original writer as well for the episode. So it was kind of almost like, basically she rewrote The Naked Time for the Next Generation. But there was a lot of things that they pulled out too. And I think that was probably one of the episodes that started the kind of hard feelings between her and Roddenberry, because she felt like he had too of a heavy editing hand with her scripts, I know.
Interesting.
But yeah, I mean, it was at least with Star Trek, the original series, we'd already seen a few episodes of these characters, so we kind of know who they are. And then seeing them act like, this, we kind of understand that this is something that's kind of out of character from them, but also revealing another side of them that we didn't see. But with the Next Generation, like, it's only the second episode. We barely know these characters. And here they are, like, losing their minds.
And it's
these guys are the ones these are the people who took over the Enterprise?
Yeah, and it's also very strange if what you said, that his idea was, let's show their inner motivations, and then the actions that they take are just very strange. Like, so Tasha's inner motivation is apparently just to bone all of the guys. Like,
yeah.
Which is especially weird because she grew up on a planet that was just full of rape gangs all of the time. So there's some she needs some serious psychological help if her inner motivation is to do that. Okay, either Tasha needs psychological help or Gene Roddenberry needs to talk to a woman at some point in his life.
Yeah, I think all of the above. I think also Gene Roddenberry probably needed some counseling about a couple things. Because who writes the background of a character that they spent pretty much their entire childhood running from rape games?
I could see that developing into a character. But then if you're like, all right, so let's do some character development. Woman who escaped rape gangs. What do you want in life? A dick. Yes. That makes sense. That's perfect.
Yeah, well, and of course, right after she explains to David that was her childhood, the first thing she's going to want to do is just jumping. Which I also read, that was actually, DC Fontana had tried to write that to where Data turns down her advances. And and I guess now they want to make sure and have a sexy time.
Well, they had
Apparently,
to
a lot of
prove.
these sci-fi writers have like inner fantasies about sex with robots, so that had to be in there somewhere.
They also had to prove early on that Data had a case of the not gaze.
Fully functional.
Fully functional,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. He loses his V card in this episode, and then he
Programmed
doesn't
in
play again
multiple techniques.
for up until they are on another Enterprise. Actually, up until the first contact.
No, there's that whole episode where he's dating the woman. In Theory, I think it's called, is all about
Yeah.
Data having a relationship.
I don't think they ever get the.
Well, you know, it's
sex.
network TV, so they're not gonna like show it, but it's strongly implied that they're having a sexual relationship.
Well, you remember that scene with the Borg Queen in First Contact, where she's like, "When's the last time?" And he gives
Oh yeah,
her,
that's
like,
right.
a
And he
countdown.
dates it.
Yeah,
He
and
dates
I
it
think
back.
it was like 7 years. Or
Yeah, you're
8
right.
years. So I always assumed that it was Tasha was the last time.
You're right. You're right. Either that or the writers of First Contact forgot about that episode of Next Generation.
Yeah, that's not inconceivable.
Yeah. Well, back to the original series episode. That scene with Sulu is really cool, and like, it's something that it's actually playing right now on the like little window in the episode that we're showing, and it's super iconic for the character of Sulu. So iconic that when they redid it, when J.J. Abrams redid it, they thought that Sulu should still be able to use a sword. And so the new Sulu knows how to use a sword just because of this episode.
Yep. Well, and I was watching a couple of videos with George Takei, and he said that this is his favorite episode. And he had a really interesting story about it. He was saying that when he was talking, and I really should remember the name of the writer, but this writer had actually, he was one of the associate producers for the original series, and he was involved in the first season of Next Generation as well. And he'd come to George Takei when they were filming another episode. He said, "Oh, I'm writing the script, and when people lose their judgment and stuff, and I was thinking of giving Sulu a samurai sword to chase people around with a samurai sword." And George Takei says, "Well, you know, that's what I guess that would be ethically consistent, but really, this is the 23rd century, and Sulu would think of his heritage as being more broader instead of just being reduced to his ethnicity." And when I was a kid, what I did is I didn't play samurai, I played Robin Hood, because I grew up watching The Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn. And he said, like, he used to get his, he turned his backyard into Sherwood Forest. He had his mom make him a Robin Hood costume, and he had all of his friends come over and play Friar Tuck and the other characters. And so we said, wouldn't it be interesting instead if we had him with what do you call it, a fencing foil, and oh yeah, that is a really interesting idea. And he said, because I would imagine Sulu has seen himself as kind of a swashbuckler deep down. So that's what they ended up doing with, and the guy asked him, the writer, which his name was John D.F. Black, said, "Well, do you fence?" And the kid says, "Oh yes, it's my favorite sport. Never having held a sword before in his life." So what does he do? He gets the Yellow Pages, which probably half of the people out there nowadays don't even remember what that is. But there used to be a big book that had Yellow Pages in it.
Listen
This is
up,
Captain
kids.
Picard aboard the Starfleet vessel Enterprise.
Before Google,
Please do us the honor.
you actually had a book, and somebody actually threw it on your doorstep once a year. But he went to go look up fencing lessons, and he found...
And the book had all of the phone numbers in it. And you would actually call to other people on your phone. You'd use your phone as a phone.
Now, they didn't have text then, oddly enough. They only speak voice. And it was a favorite pastime back in those days before they had caller ID to just pick random names off the phone book and do prank calls. Which I never did, but I was dumb enough as a kid to not realize that was going on a couple of times in my life calls. But anyways, he found a fencing school on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. He goes there, and he talks to the instructor, whose name was Mr. Faulkner. And he finds out that the professor, or the teacher, who's the instructor, who's already arranged for private lessons for this episode, was the guy who did the choreography for Adventures of Robin Hood.
Yeah, I was gonna say when you mentioned that this is the guy that Sulu looked up to. He played around like him in his backyard. I was gonna say, that actually reminds me of that super famous scene of Errol Flynn. That like even if you don't know this movie, I suspect that you've seen like memes or you've seen it in other movies. You've seen this scene of Robin Hood swinging in bravely with his sword and swinging it around in Sherwood Forest. You've seen the scene, even if you don't know that you've seen it. Yeah. And it really, really looks like the same style of fencing. So that's interesting that he studied from the same guy. That's cool.
Yeah. And it was on that he actually had played a double in certain scenes of the movie. So he actually had watched him fencing on the original Robin Hood movie. And I was reading that George got so into this that he was practicing his fencing when he wasn't on stage, between filming scenes. And he got so into it that he was like lunging at crew members with his sword, and he actually stabbed a couple of them with it. And so the whole crew like had a meeting with the producers and was like, if you ever put a sword in Sulu's hand again, we're gone.
So Sulu only got a sword again when they replaced George Takei.
Yeah.
That's funny. And well, what is it about the TOS episode that like makes it work? Because I know we already said that it's because it's not the second episode of the series, but there has to be more. Like, because the Next Generation episode is terrible and one of the worst
it's
ones.
Not the worst, actually, but it's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah.
It's actually surprising that they let them keep making more episodes.
Yeah.
It's like you do a pilot and then this is your first episode after the pilot. You don't deserve to keep making shows. That's what I think. So what is it if you have the same story, the same idea of everybody on the starship gets drunk? What is it about the TOS episode that makes it good, that makes it enjoyable? Because I like the TOS episode. It's nice. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, I love the Next Generation and I love the characters, but I think one thing that you couldn't do with the Next Generation, which you could do with the original series, is you couldn't quite lean on the chemistry between the main characters like you could with the original series. I mean, the trio of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy is kind of just carries a lot of the show, But I also think that a lot of it also just had to do with that, what we were talking about before, is the characters are much more well established, so the conceit works better. And also, like, saying, like, in the Next Generation, they all kind of turn into a bunch of horny teenagers. Where in the original series, it was kind of a bit more interesting because it really was kind of trying to explore a little bit more of the inner psychology of these main characters and kind of use that as a driving force in the story. You had the whole tension with everything else happening on in the background and stuff like that. And so, I mean, I think also just being, kind of original in what it was as well, where the Next Generation being more of kind of not really a remake, but kind of. The idea just doesn't have the impact that it was when you're kind of trying to tell this story the first time. Yeah, I mean, that's what I would say. And I just have to mention, too, like, watching that in the period where Brazil is, like, in its worst point for the COVID-19 pandemic. And the guys beamed down in the original episode, Spock and this other guy. and they're in what I assume are hazmat suits. I don't know. They're like these red lacy
They look
things.
like hazmat suits. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's never really made clear.
And then
But
the
then
guy is just like, I'm gonna take this off.
yeah, there's
Fuck
these
hazmat
frozen bodies and there's like frozen blood all over the place, which showing like blood in a scene in the 1960s was kind of a big deal. But the guy just like Spock walks out of the room and he's like, oh, my nose itches. So he takes off his glove, scratches his nose in this like mysterious murder scene, and then gets down to look at something closer and puts his hand right next to this bloody stain. And then apparently what we find out is some kind of mutated water like jumps onto his hand, and then he goes and like rubs his nose again and puts his glove on. And I'm like, no, you idiot, don't do that. I was like, this is like half the people in the street right now, you know, going around like wearing their mask on their chin, you know, like as if it's some talisman that's going to protect them there, you know, or you know, they go to McDonald's and they like order their ice cream cone and take down their mask and they're all like, right in the, you know, the middle of the pandemic. But then something that drives me crazy about Star Trek in general. In the Next Generation episode, they realize something weird has happened, that everybody has died on the ship. And they beam over without atmosphere suits, without space, without anything. They just beam over there like regular. Of course you're going to get infected. Like they're like, oh, we decontaminated in the transporter. But then like 5 minutes later, they're like, oh, well, there's so many things in space. Like, you know, it's not anything that we know.
This is the thing that actually pisses me off about the Next Generation episode. Is, all right, yeah, they were a little bit cavalier about going over there. But they thought that the transporter would solve the problem. Because it usually does. All right, it's not the best idea, but we'll give them this one because usually the transporter solves this problem. All right. So they get back and almost immediately realize that Geordi is infected. So what do? They just like leave Geordi by himself in sickbay, and Crusher fucks off to go do her own thing. And Geordi's just like there with no security and no nothing. They're just like, all right, man, so you're gonna hang out here, right? And Geordi's like, whatever, man, I'm totally fucked up.
Yeah.
Cool. You stay there.
I'm going to go see what Wesley's up to.
Yeah. And that's what pisses me off. That.
Well, too, like, there's no quarantine procedures. Like, anybody who was around him, like maybe Riker and Data should be kept in sick bay until they figure out what's going on too. And it's like, oh no, go run around.
Get out of here. Get out of here. We don't care. Yeah. Yeah. And so the Next Generation episode is just full of these little problems, right? And the next one there is, what the fuck is Data doing getting infected? Anyways.
Well, I always thought that Data was a total android, but they actually explain in some of these early episodes the first season, of the Next Generation, that he's actually biomechanical. So he has synthetic biological parts. But even though Worf apparently is immune, but the android who's just, he might have some organic parts, but they're still synthetic. The other thing is, I thought he wasn't supposed to have any emotions, but he's all like he gets it done with his boning session with Tasha, and he's all like, "Hey, what's up, Captain?" You know.
And he's making terrible jokes. Isn't this the episode he makes that terrible limerick?
Well, no, he was saying that he read somebody or he heard somebody from one of the shuttle bays say. He wasn't infected yet at that point. So that was actually one of the best moments of the series, because he's starting to say it. He's like, there was a woman in Venus who had the body of and Picard cuts him off. Yeah, and then he looks over at Worf, was like, I don't understand what you're either.
One of Worf's best lines, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely a redeeming feature of the episode. Is that little interaction there is great. But then this episode actually starts one of the big memes of Star Trek, and it's that Wesley is terrible.
I don't know. For me, it's kind of the I guess Wesley doesn't annoy me as much as he does most people, but maybe it's because I didn't see the first season when I was a kid, and I wasn't like, oh god, this is so stupid. But I mean, it's way over the top. Like even drunk as hell, Wesley is way smarter than everybody else, and the one who saves the day. But they're still like, even after he saves the day, they're still like, shut up, Wesley. So I don't know which is more annoying, like Wesley being way smarter than everybody, or everybody just being like, oh, kid, well, maybe we should thank his science teacher too then. You know? Your sound cut off there for a second.
The cord to my microphone sometimes comes out.
Oh, okay.
So this episode annoys me about Wesley because so he gets infected by Geordi, and they're like playing around with this tractor beam, repulsor beam, right? And he's like, yeah, it's just like the ship, except the ship is blah 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 powerful. And you're like, oh, whatever, Wesley, you're cute. And then he goes and he takes over engineering using his talk boy, which is still cute. I'm not against this so far. And then they manage to break back into engineering, and they're all gonna die. And then Wesley has this idea: Data could fix it. Even if he's drunk, Data could fix it. And I'm still there. I'm still there with Wesley because Wesley's friends with Data. Wesley knows Data's gonna. That's fine. But then they're like, we don't have enough time. And Wesley, still drunk. Remember, he's still drunk. He's like, oh man, my tractor beam could do it. Let's use the tractor beam to push the other ship into the other thing, and that'll save all of us. And the engineer is like, shut up, Wesley. That'll take like a month to figure out. And he's like, no, I'll just do it right now in like 5 seconds. Drunk. And everybody's like, go home, Wesley, you're drunk. Which is literally true. And then he does it. And you're like, and that's where it loses me.
I almost have to say it's worth it for the exchange between him and Picard. When Picard's trying to talk him down, and he's all like, yeah, this is affection. It's like, you're not rational right now because you have this, it's very much like alcohol. He's like, oh, so you say I'm drunk, cool. And then he still gets Picard to give him what he wants. Because he's like, this whole time he's trying to get Picard to give him an order to do something. And Picard's trying to like get him away from there. And he still tricks Picard into like telling him what he wants to do. He's like, oh, I can do that for you. And then hangs up and goes off and does it.
Tractor beams are my specialty, Skipper. Yeah. I'll get right on it.
And Picard's just like, holy shit, the kid just totally outsmarted me. I don't know, for me that whole conversation was priceless. You mean I'm drunk? But the other thing that I loved was that, oh my god, the thing between him and Beverly.
And Beverly? Yeah.
Yeah.
That is an enjoyable. That is that's a
no, doctor.
No, doctor. And Beverly's like all over him, like, Captain, a woman has needs.
She's like, you owe me something. Like, we don't know at this point that, he literally ordered her husband to his death. And she's like, you basically like hinting that you killed my husband, so now you have to pleasure me. Gene Roddenberry had some really funny ideas about sex. If you don't get it from this episode, you will eventually.
And the very telling part about this episode is that, and it's strange because the original series there was Uhura and Nurse Chapel, right? And neither one of them become nymphomaniacs.
Well, kind of. I mean, I thought that the Tasha
not nymphomaniacs. They aren't out trying to undress everyone around them. But all 4 of the main women in TNG are just desperate for some cock. There's no emotional depth to it at all. All of them are just out for the nearest dick they can get.
Yeah.
And it's what happened? What happened between TOS and TNG that Was there just nobody there to be like, Gene, maybe Uhura doesn't need to shag the nearest guy?
Yeah.
Ah, you got a point there. We can have her say another line. I don't know.
Well, I think it's the whole syndrome of kind of the same thing that happened with George Lucas when he made the prequels. Is that the guy was kind of a legend at the point. Nobody wanted to say no to him. And also, you didn't have the strict censorship that you did in the 60s. So he got, in the late 80s, he was much more open about those things. I mean, you watch sitcoms from the time, and it's like you said, like, everybody gets drunk and screws everybody all the time in that era. So I think that probably had a lot to do with it. The thing is, it's funny. I mean, something I wanted to mention is Roddenberry's whole thing with Star Trek was kind of one of the things was promote progressive values. But you see so many examples, especially in the first two series, of him trying to be feminist and failing catastrophically. And like with the whole Nurse Chapel thing, I mean, I thought it was cool that like she ends up coming out with her feelings with Spock, but then she's all like trying to like do herself up, and like she's obsessed with her makeup and hair all of a sudden, and then Kirk goes into this whole thing about how he's all into his yeoman, but he can't, and then he's like, it's this Enterprise, it's like a woman, and I give and she just takes. Now I understand why they call her she. And he like hits the ship. It's like, oh my god, this is terrible. Seriously.
And yet somehow that is better than the TNG episode. If you're talking about feminism, I think.
Yeah.
I mean.
Well, no, and I'm not saying that the Next Generation was even better. That's why I say like, and then you think like some 20 years later. Maybe he would have got a little better of a clue, but then he has this like the one like kind of butch character in the whole is like the one who's most desperate to get with a man. Yeah. Right after she explains about how she was running away from rape gangs her whole childhood.
But all of them do. Think about it. You got Beverly who's going after Picard. Tasha goes after Data. Deanna shows up at engineering and distracts Riker and calls him Bill for the only time ever. And she's so desperate. She's like carrying her to sickbay, and she's like, oh, Bill, don't you want me in your mind forever? Yeah. Like, oh my God, Deanna, shut up. And then
it's really terrible.
Every other female character, if there's like a female character over here somewhere, they're making out. The
only one that wasn't was the engineer.
The engineer. Yeah. Somebody was probably like, Gene Roddenberry, you're kind of doing some harm to the feminist movement here. All right, the engineer doesn't. Problem solved.
I kept on thinking too. I was watching this. I rewatched the episode today, and I remembered I can't remember what channel it was, but I watched this YouTube video recently where they were talking about a bunch of weird things about Star Trek that you didn't know. And I hadn't known this before, that apparently in the 70s, Roddenberry had recorded a two-sided LP of him as Gene Roddenberry interviewing Sarek. And he got Mark Leonard to do it. And part of the interview is him going into detail about Vulcan sex. And they talk about like how Spock's mother was, I guess, special because normally Vulcan sex is so rough that it would kill most Earth women, but Spock's mother could take it.
That's strange. And you know what I just thought of that it reminded me of was J.K. Rowling like dropping all kinds of ridiculous shit about Harry Potter onto Twitter. For years after she finishes the books. You know? Like, oh yeah, by the way, there are no toilets in Harry Potter. They just poop in their pants and then they disappear the poop. Like,
This is what I try to tell people. Like these things about a lot of these things on the internet, they're not new. They just have a different medium. back in the day, they would just record like two-sided LPs that you could only find in a couple, garage sales.
They made
afterwards.
like 10 printings of because no one would pay money for this crap.
Kind of like Leonard Nimoy's album with the Frodo Baggins song.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's crazy, man. I mean, I'd always read on like message boards and fan sites that about Vulcan sex, but I assumed that it was like Spock said it once offhand. He was talking to Nurse Chapel and she was like, "Hey Spock, let's fuck," and Spock was like, "No, it's dangerous for you. I must meditate and drown out my sexy feelings." Like, I assumed that was the conversation.
No. Apparently, he did this whole interview with Sarek, where Sarek talks about the whatever the equivalent of the birds and bees would be for Vulcan. And Roddenberry was a notorious womanizer, so I think he really probably had some issues, maybe a sex addiction or something like that. But it comes out in weird ways in Star Trek. I mean, even in the original series, you see things. And, it's very clear. Like I talked about in the last episode. For me, I think that what his idea was with Wesley, Riker, and Picard was like the way he saw himself at different stages of his life. And Riker is like Kirk. Picard barely gets any of the whole series, but Riker's always hooking up with somebody, just like Kirk was. And that's the way Roddenberry was. I mean, even when he was married to Michelle Barrett. I saw a documentary that his son made about him, and they talked about that. She didn't like it, but she knew that's where he was and tolerated it. And he'd actually had an affair with Nichelle Nichols at one point too during the original series and stuff. So there's some weird stuff in there, and thankfully I think in the later series or in later seasons too, the Next Generation, they cut down on some of that, but. Yeah, I mean it's weird. It's uncomfortable to watch now. Some 30, 50 years later.
Yeah. But one of the, I don't know if this was just a coincidence or some sort of serendipitous foreshadowing, that one of the biggest problems with the Next Generation era, even after Roddenberry left, was the sexism in the production. It got phased out in the show. The show became much more feminist on screen, but underneath, behind the scenes, the production remained incredibly sexist against the actresses who were working. And when we get more detail on like an episode about DS9, we can talk more about what happened to what is her name? The actress who played Dax.
Yeah, Terry Farrell.
Terry Farrell. We can probably talk a little bit right now.
Jerry Ryan too, with
Jerry Ryan. Yes, exactly. And then now the actress who portrayed on Next Generation, she left. Tasha. Yeah. Denise Crosby was also not treated the best. And these were all decisions by the producers that weren't Gene Roddenberry.
Yeah. Rick Berman. I mean, Roddenberry at least tried. I mean, I'm not trying to dog on him too much. I'm just saying, it's kind of interesting to see like how he tries and then fails miserably. And I guess that's part of that as being a product of his time. But I think also some of it was just kind of some of these weird things, sex hang-ups that he had.
Yeah. I mean, Roddenberry is what?
Berman was just straight up misogynist.
Yeah. Roddenberry is what? From the 20s is when he was born?
Yeah.
So, like, his mind is stuck in 1940. And so, if you think about what was progressive for 1940, Roddenberry's doing pretty well. And so, whatever for him. But
some of the best. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But what's really interesting for me when I watch this show is that it's, I don't know, some sort of evil foreshadowing about all of the shit that women on the show would go through. Almost every woman that was on the show had to deal with some kind of production issue. Whether Gates McFadden, who just got fired because Maurice Hurley, the new producer, didn't like her, even though the fans liked her, the rest of the production staff liked her. He didn't, so she was gone. And then she had to come back after Maurice got fired. Or Troy had to fight to get paid. This time around, on Picard, she had to fight to get to get paid what she deserved. So it's a Star Trek thing, and like this episode,
thing, really.
yeah, it's a Hollywood thing. But you know, this episode is showing that it's a Star Trek thing, even though Star Trek wants to be a progressive.
That's one of the frustrating thing about what they do with Tasha in this episode too, because Tasha was kind of, I think, was Roddenberry's. I mean, very blatantly, it was kind of his effort to break out the stereotypes by making the security officer a woman, you know, and you know, she's like this kind of badass warrior. But then we find out deep down all she really wants is a man to hold her and, you know, and make sweet love to her. You know, that's what she wants to wear pretty clothes and stuff. You know, that's a real betrayal of the character. I mean, it doesn't mean that she has to be masculine or be super masculine or anything like that. But the whole idea is that, you know, women can be badasses too. Women can be security officers. Women can be warriors. And then it's like what her deep down desire is really just to be a girly girl. You know, that's sad. And then the thing about what's said about her leaving then too is that, you know, the main women that are left are in these kind of stereotypical nurturing roles, you know, where women are kind of relegated to caring. You know, you have the counselor and the doctor. So they didn't have anybody. They had Ford replace her in the role. They didn't bring in really any other woman. The only one that kind of came up once in a times that they did was like, you know, not regular ones, like maybe like Ensign Rowe or something like that, you know. But it's sad, and the thing is it kind of belays it. For all of that was valid criticisms about Roddenberry that I brought up. The thing is also when he did make honest, good efforts to break out of those stereotypes, a lot of times he was frustrated by producers. Like with the original, I talked to you about this, something I thought would be interesting to do an episode on sometime. But with the original pilot of the original series, The Cage, the person who has the role of Spock ends up inhabiting is actually a female first officer who was Majel Barrett, who ends up becoming his wife later, who was his girlfriend at the time, and she later became Nurse Chapel. But it was this interesting role reversal because you had these women that were always portrayed on TV as being really emotional and stuff like that, and then you have this kind of balance between the two main characters, of one of them being the more passionate, emotional person, and the other one being the most rational. Well, what we ended up getting was Kirk and Spock. Kirk is very much the gung-ho, fiery, passionate guy, and Spock is kind of like his counterweight to that, at least in the way they act. Like we said before, like, you know, Spock is actually very sensitive inside. But in the original concept it was going to be Pike, was this very fiery, passionate guy, and then number one was what we don't even really know what her real name is until later. Is this very cool, calculating woman. She's the counter for that, which is a total role reversal. She kind of a gender swapping thing for what the concepts of gender were at the time, which would have been really interesting. But the producers were not having it. In fact, they even attacked the actress. They attacked Majel Barrett because they said she was too cold. They didn't want a woman like that on the series, and I'm sure they had problems with her being the first officer and stuff like that too. And so the producers, cut it out. And then with Denise Crosby, I think it was a couple different things. I had saw her at a Star Trek convention years and years ago in Billings, Montana, and she talked about why she left. And what she said at the time was that she wanted to be in a role where she would have a more active, or in a series where she'd have a more active role. And Roddenberry, she talked to Roddenberry about it. She talked to Gene about it, and he said, "Well, my vision is like the original series is to really focus on three main characters. So your character is really more of a background one, like everybody except for Picard, Riker, and Data. And she wanted to have be in a series where she'd have a more active role. That's what she said at the time was the reason why she left. but I think that some things have come out since then. That there was more to the story than just that as well.
Oh, for sure. Like this week, the Red Letter Media guys stole our idea. I'm sure that they found out about this show and that they took our idea and did it before we got a chance to do our well-researched dive into Star Trek TNG Season 1. And part of it was talking about Denise Crosby. And they brought up this tweet that I remember existing, but they, of course, had it more well-researched, that Rick had posted at one point where he was like waxing nostalgic about Denise Crosby. And he was like, Denise Crosby, you're my friend. And I remember shooting the last episode with you, what is that one called? With the Skin of Evil. I remember shooting Skin of Evil, and it was such a sad day to see you leave. And I remember that you gave me your communicator prop. And it stayed with me on my desk for the rest of the time that I worked on Star Trek as a reminder of blah, 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 friendship and blah, blah, whatever. And then Denise Crosby replied and was like, dude, Skin of Evil wasn't the last episode that I filmed because we did it out of order. There was another episode that I filmed later. We just aired them in that episode. And what really happened is that you came up to me the moment that the camera was off and ripped the communicator off of my shirt and said, you won't be needing this anymore. Get out of here. So...
Yeah. And then to add insult to injury, what ends up being when they kill Tasha the second time? What happened? Remember? What was the episode where they bring her back because of the whole time fuckery that happens? And then she goes back in time, but then we find out that she gets captured by Romulans and is basically forced into being this Romulan senator, somebody's concubine, who rapes her, and she gives birth to a child who's half Romulan, who's just like her. It's the same actress when we see her. And then when she tries to escape, her own daughter betrays her, and she's executed. Obviously somebody still was holding a grudge against Denise Crosby. But I remember when I rewatched that episode recently, and I thought it almost made me sick to my stomach because I was like, the character really deserved more than that. And the end for her, and then when you think about the whole thing about her trying to escape from rape gangs, and then what happens to her in the end is she's made into a sex slave, and then betrayed by her own daughter, who was the product of rape. And that's how her character ends. The second time that they kill her, that's really messed up. There's so much wrong with that. I mean, both in terms of misogyny, but also just not doing justice to the character, and holding personal grudges and letting that show up within the series and everything like that. It's just really disgusting. And from what I understand, Michael Piller was the one who wrote that episode, but I think that this is unfair, but from what I think I saw somewhere, I'm going to have to confirm this later, that thing was actually Berman's idea. It seemed kind of like that was him trying to get back at her again, because he took it personally that she left the series in the first season.
What a dick. In every way. Well, cool. So, if you had to, you've been working your way through the first season, right? How far through the first season have you got now?
I just watched episode 17.
So about 2/3 of the way. Would you put The Naked Now at the top or the bottom of a first season?
Yeah, it's not at the bottom, but it's down there on the list.
It's not the racist episode.
10.
So.
It's at the bottom 5, I'd say.
It's not
the one right after that.
Yeah,
is even worse.
That is the worst episode of Star Trek, and we're not going to do a show about it because
no, even the actors said it was the worst episode.
Yeah,
not just of the series that they made, but of Star Trek.
It's definitely the worst. Yeah, I think I agree. I think it's. But you know what's funny is Allie said that she really liked it.
Yeah, but it's not the worst. But it's definitely it's very cringy. You know, um, I think it was cool that they. I like the fact that they tried to make a reference and a connection with the original series, like. But it was. I think it was too early in the show, and it just wasn't that well executed. And, you know,
Hmm.
um, so I mean, there, like I said, there are some moments I like. I thought the conversation between Picard and Wesley was actually pretty priceless. Um, and but we know the characters a little bit more. The whole tension between him and Crusher was funny. Um, but I mean, it just it's not really very good written, not very well written
No, it's
episode.
not. And I think a lot of these problems from this first episode hold true for the rest of season one. It's not
Mhm.
very well written. The characters aren't very well developed. The things
Yeah,
that they try to do don't come together. You know, they have some ideas, but then they don't finish the idea. Um,
yeah.
and what we're going to do next week, a little preview for everybody, is we're going to talk about episodes from season one that we liked. Because most of season one is a giant garbage fire. We just talked about the racist episode. There are also a bunch of Q episodes that I think are terrible. I don't know about you, but the Q episodes in season one, I don't like. Did you like them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Encounter at Farpoint isn't bad.
Not that one. The other
Yeah.
two.
But I don't remember the third. I haven't rewatched the third one yet. I just watched the second one the other day, and it's just they go lean way too hard in the comedic part, and there's the weird like pig people walking around and stuff too. But I mean, it was very ham-fisted. But I thought the ultimate kind of moral of the story of like Riker discovering that like ultimate power is actually not that great was kind of cool in the end, but it was like I said, it was ham-fisted. It was
Yeah.
really just beaten over your head. And Q was way too much of a clown in that episode for sure.
Um, yeah. So yeah, they're all pretty bad, but the good ones for me, one is I don't know if you've got there yet. One is an episode called Symbiosis
The
with
name rings a bell.
the the species that is like addicted to a drug from the other species in the same system.
Okay, no, I haven't seen that one.
Um,
Um,
that's a good one. And then the other one that I like, but some other people don't, is Conspiracy.
mhm. Yeah, that's the next to the last episode of the season, right?
Yeah, with the little
Yeah.
bugs.
I don't. I'm not sure if I've actually seen it. I'm pretty close to getting there. I'll probably watch it this week. Oh, I'll definitely watch it before we watch when we film the next episode. I mean, the one that I think a lot of people don't like, but that I like because of the ideas that they explore and some of the character exposition in it. That I'd like to talk about is I believe it's called The Traveler, but it's where the Traveler debuts.
Okay.
And,
Okay.
and then the one I just got done watching, which I was trying to look up the title right now, I don't remember, but where they discover the non-organic life form on this planet that was supposed to be terraformed. And I mean, it's not the most best. Neither of these episodes are the best written TV, but the ideas that are explored in them, I think, are really interesting. And I kind of Home Soil is the
Home
name of the episode.
Soil. Yes.
Yeah, and then
Okay.
the other one,
Where no one has gone before. That's the one I'm talking about.
yeah. Um,
Yeah.
so I like this is something I really like about Star Trek is when they actually kind of explore the possibilities of what
Okay.
life can form and stuff like that. So it's like Hugh said in the finale. It's not about just
Charting
going out there,
galaxies
but
or
uh,
exploring whatever. It's about the
it's about
possibilities
exploring the
within.
possibilities of resistance.
Yes. Nice. So that's what we'll talk about next time. I'll be sure to watch those 2 episodes. I'll watch.
Okay.
What was it called again? Home
Where no
Soil.
one has gone before, and Home Soil.
Yes, Home Soil and Where No One Has Gone Before. And yeah. And
Probably should talk about The Long Goodbye too.
I don't know. We'll see. There's a guy here on the chat. Polar Knights. What is your favorite episode of Star Trek? He says he's a big fan of Deep Space Nine, which we are too. It's just we're talking about TNG today. But what's your favorite episode, man? Let's see what he has to say.
You asked me this last time, right? And
No, I asked you, but I'm asking this guy who's in the chat
Oh, okay.
right now. Let's see what he has to say. If he's still here, and then we'll wrap up. Yeah, I asked you last time. We had our opinions on that. I gave you a really, B-side one. He says he can't choose. Yeah, I know.
That's
Me
how
too.
I feel.
Me too. But yeah, next time we'll be talking about some season 1 TNG, and in a few weeks we'll get to Deep Space Nine. We're looking at season 1 TNG today. Maybe in a few weeks we'll look at TOS. We were talking about doing a Space Seed Wrath of Khan episode. Tom wants to do a mirror episode Mirror Universe, looking at the original series and the Deep Space Nine mirror universes and comparing those. But honestly, both of our favorite series is Deep Space Nine, so we're kind of warming up to get there. We don't want to jump into the good stuff right away. You gotta build up to it. Anticipation, as they say. So thanks for watching, everybody. Tom, any last words before we sign out for the night?
Well, I just have to say I think we have a good crew together, and we can learn to avoid.
Hey, you're taking my role. That's what Picard says. You stay in your lane, man. Stay in your lane.
Oh, well then, that was one thing I wanted to say. I loved the lines at the opening of both seasons. So I'll go backwards in this one with the how they start. With the Naked Now says Riker all day, and then cut to the opening scene. And then this one, we'll say for the next episodes that it's like nothing we've dealt with.
Yeah, I'm sure. Oh, and somebody else, we were in the middle of something, but somebody else in the chat said that Tom, that you look like Simon Pegg from Mission Impossible. So, or Simon Pegg from Star Trek, but I don't think that they watched the J.J. Abrams Trek. So
yeah, you don't know. But,
so yeah,
I guess that's who I'm turning into my middle age, because it used to be Michael J. Fox.
Well, that's probably better than turning into middle-aged Michael J. Fox.
Perhaps.
Right?
Yeah, at least I get to be on Star Trek, even if it's the sucky one.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll see y'all when we see y'all. We don't really have a production schedule, so whenever we do it, we'll do it. And until then, later.